As we begin Algebra 1 for your freshman year, I want to go over what we are calling the unit projects. You will have a unit project or a mid-unit project, depending on whether there is only an end-of-unit test or whether there are mid-unit and end-of-unit tests. Your math classes in the past may have emphasized homework or worksheets in class and test scores. Here in Alvarez, what we are trying to move towards is having your math class, your grade in math class, to be determined more by your mastery of the Common Core standards. So what's going to happen is each unit or each half unit, you are going to be given a group project. And in this group project, I will explain what the Common Core standards are that you should have mastered in that unit or half unit. They are also the standards that will be tested when you take your mid-unit test or your end-of-unit test. You will have some type of task to complete and give a presentation on. The way this will work is the first half of every class usually will be me going over a new lesson, introducing new vocabulary words, introducing new mathematical concepts, and working through some practice problems with you. And then the second half of each class usually will be you having time with your group to work on your project. And these projects will last roughly 3 weeks, at which time I will be going around as you're working on the projects, making sure everyone in the group understands what's going on, making sure everyone in the group understands the mathematical concepts that we're going over, and making sure every member of your group can do the Common Core standards. If we need to use translation software in order for me to ensure that you understand what we're doing, then we will use translation software. The 2 days before each test, we will give the presentations. You'll have approximately 15 minutes per group to give your presentation and to answer questions. Those questions might come from your classmates. Other teachers might come in to watch these presentations. Members of admin might come in and watch these presentations. When you are giving your presentation, if you feel more comfortable speaking in your native language, then speak in your native language. I will have already talked to you to ensure that you understood what you were doing in the project. So on presentation day, if you feel more comfortable speaking in your native language, or if you need to switch in between speaking in English and speaking in your native language, then please do so. The idea is that these 2 days of presentation will be your review days for the test. You, along with your group members, will present your project, and then you will also be listening to the other groups in class present their projects. Then we will go in and have the mid-unit or end-of-unit tests. So I want to go through what the Unit 1 project looks like. The driving question for this one is, how do we use stats to find typical values and determine how typical they are? What I'm talking about here is finding the measures of center, the appropriate measures of center, and using the measures of variability to analyze how consistent those values are. In Unit 1, we have 3 Common Core standards that are tested for. The first one is that you need to be able to represent data with plots on the real number line, meaning you need to be able to create dot plots, you need to be able to create histograms, and you need to be able to create box plots. The second standard, you need to be able to use statistics appropriate to the shape of the data distribution to compare center. So that shape of distribution is going to tell you whether you're using the median or the mean. And you need to be able to compare the spread. Depending on which measure of center you chose to use, now you need to be able to compare whether you should be using the interquartile range or the standard deviation. And this needs to happen with 2 or more different data sets. So when you create your question, keep that in mind. You need to have a way of splitting up the answers to your question so that you are going to be able to create 2 dot plots out of this data, 2 histograms out of this data, and 2 box plots out of this data. So that once you decide, am I using median or mean? Am I using interquartile range or standard deviation? You then need to be able to compare those measures of center and measures of variability in each of your 2 plots. And the last standard that we are testing for is that you need to be able to interpret differences in shape, center, and spread in the context of the data sets, accounting for possible effects of extreme data points or outliers. In other words, when you are comparing your plots after you've drawn them and you've decided which stats you're going to use and you have calculated them, you need to be able to explain to your audience what those statistics mean in the context of the question that you asked. Now we can look at the project steps. The first step in your project is data collection. You are going to choose a topic. As a group, you need to decide on a topic of interest. You need to ensure that your topic gives you numerical responses. You need to be able to plot your responses on a number line. That means whatever question you ask, the responses that you receive should be number responses, not categories. So you don't want to do something like, what is your favorite singer? Because people are going to give you names. You need to make sure that whatever question you ask, they are going to respond to you with a number. Then you need to gather data. You need to collect data points related to your chosen topic. You need to choose a way to divide your data responses, such as the grade of the person responding, maybe their gender, maybe their ethnicity, or whatever else you choose to have them separated by. But when you ask this question, you need to be able to divide those responses into two different categories of your choosing. You will need to create at least two of each plot so you can compare their shapes, their measures of center, and their measures of variability. Again, this is what I was just talking about. So if you choose to divide it up by grade, then maybe you have 9th graders and 10th graders in one plot, and you have 11th graders and 12th graders in another plot. Maybe you have boys in one plot, girls in another plot. However you decide to divide it up, you just need to make sure that you can do it in two different plots. So you're going to have two dot plots. You're going to use the same data to create two histograms, and you're going to use the same data to create two box plots. You also want to ensure that you have enough data points for accurate analysis. If you only get 5 responses, you're not going to have good analysis. You want to get as many responses as you can, whether that is you going around and asking people in the school, or whether we work together so that you can create a Google form with a QR code that you can post up in the school and get people to respond with that way. But you want to make sure you can get a lot of data points. Next, we have data organization and cleaning. First, you're going to organize the data. This could be in a spreadsheet. This could be in a table. You can do it electronically. You could do it in a notebook. But you need to organize your data. Then you need to clean the data. You need to identify and correct any errors or inconsistencies in the data. So we'll talk about it when we get to lesson 14 and talk about outliers. But if you know there are mistakes when you recorded data points, then you can erase those data points. But if they're not mistakes, you're going to keep them. Our third step is going to be data visualization. This is where you're going to create each of the 3 plots and at least 2 of each of them. So this is where I said you need to be able to divide your data into categories. So you're going to create dot plots, at least 2 of them. You're going to create box plots, at least 2 of them. And you're going to create histograms, at least 2 of them. So let's say, for example, you chose to divide your responses between boys and girls and see if there was some kind of difference in the results that you would get. You would create one dot plot that has the data points provided to you by girls, and another dot plot that presents the data points given to you by boys. Okay? And then the same thing. The same 2, but in box plot form, and then the same 2, but in histogram form. Because what we want to be able to see is that you can create all 3 of them like the standard asks for, and so that you can see the pros and cons of each. Some give you more detail, some are quicker to create, some give you summarized data, some give you detailed data. This is why we're making all 3 versions. Step number 4 is going to be your statistical analysis. You need to be able to calculate the mean or the median, whichever one you determine is appropriate. Remember, you're going to use the shape of the distribution to make that decision. Then you need to be able to calculate the standard deviation or the interquartile range, depending on which measure of center you said was appropriate because of the shape of the distribution. And you need to be able to identify whether or not your data has outliers. So that's the 3 key components of your statistical analysis. Once you have calculated those, you're going to interpret the results. You need to be able to discuss the meaning of these stats in relation to your data. What question did you ask, and how does this mean or median relate to that? What is it telling you? What was your question, and how does it relate to your measure of variability? What is that measure of variability telling you in context? What is the shape telling you about the context of your question? If you do have outliers, or if you don't have outliers, what does that mean in the context of your question? And you need to be able to compare them to each other. So comparing what the mean is or the median is for one of your dot plots to the mean or median of your other dot plot, and how that difference or similarity relates to the context of the question that you asked. Now, most of your groups should be 3 or 4 people. It's good to have roles. Everyone needs to understand how to do everything. When I come around and I'm checking in with your group and I'm asking questions, I'm going to want to make sure that everyone in the group knows how to draw the dot plots, box plots, and histograms. I'm going to want to make sure everybody understands how to use the shape of a distribution to determine the measure of center and determine the measure of variability. I'm going to want to make sure everybody understands how to identify outliers. But it can help to give roles to each member in your group. So if that is how you want to work as a group, then some roles that you could have is somebody being responsible to be the data collector. So maybe one person creates a Google form, creates a QR code for it, and then creates a flyer that we can put up in the hallway and get students to answer with. You could have somebody that is your data analyst. So they could be in charge of calculating the measures and interpreting the results. You could have somebody who is responsible for visualizations. So you could have someone who is responsible for creating the dot plots, the box plots, and the histograms. And you could have a presenter. You could have someone who develops and delivers the presentation to the class. So you could divide up the work this way, or you could divide up the work in each category. Have each person be responsible for a part of gathering and organizing the data. Having each person responsible for making calculations. Maybe one person calculates the measure of center, somebody else calculates the measure of variability, somebody else calculates whether there are or are not outliers. Maybe when it comes to visualizations, you have one person that does all of them, or maybe one person does dot plots, one person does histograms, and one person does box plots. It's up to you. And when you present, if you want to have one person speak, everybody will stand up there during the presentation, but you could have one person speak, or you could each take a part of the presentation and do it all together. It's up to you. Now, when it comes to the presentation itself, you need to create a presentation. What this presentation looks like is up to you. You could do a slideshow that we can put on the smartboard. You could film videos. I have a ring light. I have a green screen. You can write scripts and film videos. You could draw a comic book. You could create a song. It is up to you. This is where your creativity comes into play. You're going to decide how you want your presentation to look when you get up there to give it. But in your presentation, you need to introduce the topic. You need to talk about your data collection and cleaning process. Explain how you got the data, how you organized it. You need to go through your visual representations. You need to talk about your dot plots, talk about your box plots, and talk about your histograms. You need to talk about your analysis and your results. What did you notice when you compared them? And finally, you're going to have time to answer any questions that your audience might have. And finally, we have the assessment. A part of your grade will come from a peer evaluation. So each group member will evaluate the contributions of their peers. So if you try to get away with not doing anything and getting someone else in the group to do all the work, then that is going to come across in their evaluation of you, and it will be reflected in your grade. And then there will be my assessment. I will assess what I have seen in class every day when I gave class time to work on it as a group. I will be making observations. I will be going around from group to group and talking to you and helping you. So again, this is another method that I can see who is working, who is not. Do you understand the standards that you need to for the test? That is what will go into your grade. And remember, 40% of your grade comes off of the presentations. It is the single highest percentage for your grade. So make sure you're taking this seriously. Have fun with it. Like I said, you get to come up with the question. You get to collect it. You get to determine how you want to present it. And finally, I just want to go over the project rubric. This rubric might look different to you than ones you've seen in the past. So this is called a single point rubric. On the left, you will see the standards that we are going over. Again, the first standard is that you can represent data with plots on the real number line. Can you create dot plots? Can you create histograms? And can you create box plots? Number 2, use statistics appropriate to the shape of the data distribution to compare center and spread of 2 or more different data sets. And finally, interpret differences in shape, center, and spread in the context of the data sets, accounting for possible effects of extreme data points. Now, on the right, you'll see the 3 columns. And I only have something entered in met expectations. So, for the first standard, you have met expectations if you created the dot plots, created the histograms, and created the box plots. And the plots accurately reflect the data that you collected. Now, if you leave something out, if you don't create one of the plots or your data is wrong, then you would fall in the did not meet expectations. For the exceeds expectation columns, think about what you would expect when you're watching the other groups give their presentations. Okay? So you met expectations if you just created a basic plot and it was correct. Think about what you could do to make that better, easier to understand, more engaging, more entertaining. Like, what could you do to grab the audience's attention? Or what could someone else do to get your attention and make it easier for you to understand their plots? That's what I'm talking about when I say exceeds expectations. Number 2, you met expectations if you choose the appropriate measure of center and spread based on the shape, and if you compared the center and the spreads in the context of your question. So as long as you identified the correct shape of distribution and you picked the right measure of center and the right measure of spread, and you gave a basic explanation of how that relates to your question, you have met expectations. Now, if you incorrectly identified the shape and you incorrectly identified the measure of center or spread, or if you left out an explanation of how that relates to the context of your question, then that would fall into the does not meet expectations category. For the exceeds expectations, again, think about what you would want to see from another group in class. What could they do to make you better understand what they're talking about? What could they do to grab your attention, to make it entertaining to you, to help you understand it? And whatever that is that you would want from them, make sure that is in your presentation, and you would exceed expectations. And lastly, for the third standard, you will meet expectations if you discuss any differences in shape, center, and spread, and if you explain how outliers affect the data. Again, if you leave out any of these parts, or if any of these parts are incorrect, then you would be in the does not meet expectations column. But when it comes to the exceeds expectations, think about what you would want from another group. How could they make you understand their comparison better? What could they do to grab your attention? What could they do to entertain you and make that information stick? Remember that these presentations are your review for the test. This project is built for you to do exactly what you are going to have to do on the test. So you want to make sure that you truly understand it. You want to make sure that you're explaining it to your classmates in a way that they will truly understand it. And you want them to explain it and present it to you in a manner that helps you understand it. so that you are prepared the best you can be for your test. If you have any questions about this project, please use class time to ask for clarification and ask for any help that you need.